I'm Ashley Hlebinsky, firearms historian and executive director of the University of Wyoming Firearms Research Center, and this is Meet the Pressers.
Meet the Pressers with Matt Mallory and Klint Necro. Brought to you by Public Safety and Education and the Trigger Pressers Union.
Meet the Pressers is brought to you by Mantis. Mantis X helps shooters suck less. Next Level Training, makers of CERT training products. Henry Repeating Arms, made in America or not made at all. XS Sights, fast sights in any light. Meet the Pressers is also brought to you by these fine companies, shows, organizations, and our Patreon members. Thank you.
Hello everybody, this is Klint Macro with Meet the Pressers. Meet the Pressers is a safe place for trigger pressers to congregate and talk about guns, gear, gadget, training, history, political activism, you name it. We are here today at the 2025 SHOT Show in fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada at the Otis Grand Old Otis. I'm going to call it the Grand Old Otis stage. And Matt Mallory, my esteemed colleague, is going to introduce our very special guest.
So we've had this lovely lady on numerous times in the past, so we love having her on. Always a wealth of knowledge, Ashley Hlebinsky, and she's going to talk about what she's got going on out there in the world, and curator of everything firearms and everything else. Alcohol.
All right, alcohol.
So what's new?
Oh, that's such a complicated question. So I kind of been breaking down my consulting business into different things. So I've got research centers that I'm working on. So I co-founded the University of Wyoming College of Law's Firearms Research Center. Okay. And I'm in the process of doing another center for the study of arms history in the UK.
Wow.
So that's research centers. And then I'm still working with museums. So I'm working again still to rebuild the LA Police Museum, which is in Highland Park in California. It did not burn down, but there's a lot of ash. And so working with them, working actually for a lot of gun companies, either on the creation of historical legacy products, but then also a lot of gun companies are starting to get into museums, and they want to add little museums to their ranches, their properties. So I've been working with that. Still doing some expert witness work, writing, some TV. That's it. So.
No testimony in front of Congress anytime soon?
Well, maybe.
Hush, hush.
But I did about 20 Second Amendment cases in the past 2 years as an expert. It wasn't. I did one congressional testimony a year or two back, but then everything else has been in Oregon, Washington, California, depositions, some trials. It's been really. That's dramatic. You want to get into something super dramatic? Second Amendment work post-Bruin, so post the Supreme Court decision in 2022.
Yeah, September 2022.
I did expert witness work before, and it was interesting because everyone seemed kind of happy that I was there. Yeah. Everybody, both sides, really? They were like, "Oh, thank you so much for your knowledge and not getting overly emotional and not yelling at me." It was a direct quote from a state attorney. And then Bruin happened, and then all of a sudden I had to become an absolute monster for them to get me kicked out as an expert. And all of a sudden, it activated the university system, and so there would be 7 PhDs responding to me, and I would have 2 weeks to respond to 7 PhDs, and it became a whole mess of things. But I worked on a bunch of the cases, and they got pretty personal. Actually, it was a little weird, but the history of it was really fascinating.
Wow. Now you mentioned UK. They got guns over there?
Yeah, the Royal Armories actually in the UK has one of the bigger collections in the world.
Okay.
You know what's funny actually is because we in America, we have our gun culture, right? And so there's a ton of guns, people love guns, but it's really hard to study firearms in this country. You go overseas, you go to the UK, you go to Europe, a bunch of countries in Europe are very, very interested in the study of arms because it deals with anything from flint tools through guided missiles. So arms can be a lot of different things. But because they don't have, I always say like because they don't have that baggage, it's easier for you to want to go to a university and study firearms. Like you don't get judged as much, where the university system in the U.S. is a bit volatile to the subject matter if you're not doing politics or law. So it's really funny that you end up seeing bigger collections, really nice collections overseas, and it really respects and cultivates its scholars in a way that you don't see in the U.S.
That's interesting.
I guess the flip side here is that they do gun buybacks and they just melt all the guns down.
They're actually, you broke my brain there for a second, but in New Zealand right now, I think it's New Zealand, there is a museum right now that they're talking about doing that. It's not the first time this has happened in New Zealand. We were all, a bunch of the curators, we all got together from around the world and we sent a letter saying why you can't do that. And I heard it's happening again, so I guess it can happen. But in the U.S. it's tough too because we have to abide by gun laws. If you're a non-government museum, you have to abide by all gun laws.
I think we should just have Trump buy New Zealand.
It's probably likely. Or he could just make I'm working actually, there was a bill that was introduced, Senator Lummis introduced, I think they're reintroducing it, but it actually gives museums an amnesty from, one, they don't have to pay the tax down, and two, it would allow museums to have unregistered NFA and post-86 machine guns if they meet their definition of a museum. And the definition is actually pretty good. That was always the holdup in the law, is how you define a museum, because obviously, if you want bipartisan support, you have to find a way for not everyone to just have like Billy Bob's Garage Museum. You got to find a happy medium, and so they actually, I think they did a good job with it. So it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, I think they have to like reintroduce it, but it would be nice to see museums not have to take such a hit.
But it is kind of interesting. Like Jimmy Joe Bob or whatever might have a grand collection.
Billy Bob.
Billy Bob. He might have a grand collection in his house that he's collected over the years and maybe displayed very nicely, but that's held to a different standard than the museum, and because there's a different set of rules for it.
Well, and people think the museum just it means that they're actually good stewards and caretakers of collections. But it was interesting. I was just talking to someone up in Canada that had a license to collect machine guns as a museum, and it was all legal, but like it wasn't, it was his collection. And I was like, well, that's exactly what I think the politicians in America are scared of doing, and because they're working on transferring it and making it into a more legitimate museum. But that was actually something they did. And then I learned that Canada, apparently, you can get whatever you want if you have a firearms museum license.
Wow.
Yeah.
In your garage.
In your garage, yeah. That's it. Actually, is in the law. It says in your garage.
Wow. So here,
it really says that in the law, in your garage.
In your garage. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, I was going to say, nothing surprises me about legislation.
Gotcha. Hook, line, and sinker.
Got it.
So, like being a Type 7 Class 2 FFL myself, going through that, they're like, well, you can't do it for a personal collection. You have to have a reason to do it. And of course, teaching classes all over the country, and I'm able to sell those guns to my students, and that's kind of why I ended up getting it.
Yeah.
Plus, companies send guns to get guns in hands of students, so it's easier to just have it come to me than have to go to an FFL to get them.
Yeah.
But that was interesting when I first started going through that process, where they said you can't just have like a collection. You can't get your FFL just to be a collector.
Well, it was interesting. So, like some museums, not all museums get FFLs. They go through dealers and stuff. But like some museums, if you have a manufacturer's license, that's a way a little bit around having certain like more modern machine guns, but you can't have the actual historical one. And then what was also interesting, because people just I think assume museums can do whatever they want, and I think museums assume museums can do whatever they want. But I always say, I'm like, do you really want to be the first one that finds out that what they were doing wasn't legal? But what was interesting was at Cody, when we were doing a Glock exhibition years ago, I wanted to get the full auto Glock, but again, post 86. And so we looked into, our FFL person looked into everything, reached out to the ATF. They were always really good at working with us and trying to make things happen. And even though you can get around it with like a law letter, the law letter didn't apply to the museum. Because I guess in the wording of it, you had to like be able to demonstrate it, and we were just going to put it behind glass. I don't think the museum would have approved of me like just firing an automatic Glock in the maybe right in the back. But yeah, so it was interesting because people would think, oh, there's different ways around it because FFLs can do it or other people can do it, but museums, nope, we just chill.
Yeah, so here's the thing: those rules and are they saving any lives?
No.
It's government overreach.
There's a fascinating thing, like I hear it all the time in the museum world, and I think we get that a lot with guns in general, where you'll say something, and if you're not in the gun world, the gun community, you go, oh, that makes a lot of, okay, that makes sense. But in the museum world, you kind of see that too to some extent, and so there's this big, I call it the smash and grab theory, which is what a lot of people in the museum world are afraid of, which is if you have firearms on display and you don't have appropriate security for it, that somebody would come in, smash, grab it, and use it against somebody. But then
that's reasonable. Any gun owner should be concerned about keeping their property secure.
Secured, right? Yeah. But and this it's happened not with shootings, I don't believe, but it's happened with like some smaller museums. There was one in Bedford, Pennsylvania, that they took the guns and try to sell it on the black market. But that's
in
really
Bedford,
stupid.
what were they, flintlocks?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think a Thompson was stolen years ago out of what's the place in New Mexico with Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid?
Tombstone.
Not Tombstone.
No.
It's new. Whatever. It's a place that definitely has a Thompson, and maybe the security wasn't great. And I think someone stole it because I was there filming a TV show like a couple weeks earlier. But yeah, so that's the smash and grab theory is what people get really worried about. But in reality, I mean, if you think it through, so like Cody's a great example. Cody, Wyoming. People who don't know what I'm talking about.
Wouldn't you have that same fear with the Mona Lisa or some priceless piece of art, right?
Well, yeah, but the Mona Lisa is like apparently way, way secure, and you're not going to do that with anything. But
actually, Mr. Bean. Did you ever see that movie?
No.
Yeah. Oh, the one in the Louvre is not really the real one because he messed it up. Yeah.
That makes sense.
You'll have to watch that movie.
But what I was saying with that was, what happens is, if you think about in Wyoming, okay, in Wyoming, what are you going to do? Like, go and figure out what gun you want to break the glass, load the ammunition, and then use the gun. Like, you're just gonna bring one in. And so that when you start to break down the theory of why people don't want to have guns, want to remove the firing pins from their collections, it doesn't make a lot of sense in the practical sense.
Yeah, I always say glass only keeps good people honest. Right?
That's a good t-shirt.
That would be a good t-shirt. I should add that to our collection.
So I want to throw something at you. Okay. You're one of the most educated historian type people with firearms in the United States that I know of, that I have the opportunity to speak to.
It depends on what side you ask.
Okay, well, here's what I was wondering. Could you speak to the tradition of American privately made firearms?
Oh, yeah. I haven't talked about it in a long time. Okay, so if I can talk a little bit about Bruin too, because this comes in a little bit on the topic. So when the Bruin decision was made in 2022, it was a really weird, interesting time, and this is why gun people got really excited, because they basically thrust history into the spotlight, saying that one of the most important, if not the most important thing to determining the constitutionality of a gun law is the historical tradition of American gun laws. And they identify the founding era, which is around the time of the ratification of the Second Amendment, and they define that as the most important. And under Bruin, in the actual case, they only looked at the founding era. Now, there are other kind of eras that you can look at if there are a couple of criteria, and I'm massively oversimplifying it, but if there's been a distinct change in culture, in the technology, going into the 19th century with mass production, you can make an argument that now you can look at what they call the second founding era, which is around the ratification of the 14th Amendment. And then, ironically, the 20th century is the least relevant time frame on that list. The time frame before and right after enactment is really important because it shows you what they were thinking of. And so this has been what a lot of the gun, cases have been about now. So it's like you get a magazine case and they say, okay, well, were magazines regulated in the founding era? And they try to find analogies, similar things, to say, well, this could be considered a magazine restriction. And then the other side says, no, it's not because of X, Y, Z. And so the privately made firearms comes up a lot because we have this conversation about the tradition of gun making and the laws that surround it in the founding era. And the reality is there's laws in terms of how much powder you can have, but it's a lot of powder that you can have, and then the rest of your powder you can still have. It has to be stored in a public powder magazine, and those are fire prevention laws.
It's a fire prevention law, not a restriction law. A restriction.
And then there's restricting people who can own the firearms. But when you're building the kind of network of this history, privately made firearms come into it because Well, if in some respects, before manufacturing, everything's privately made, right? You have an individual gunsmith. Yes, they're doing business, but they're making the firearms. And one thing that I pointed out when I did testify in front of Congress on this was that parts kits were actually around. Not in the same way, that we have with like an 80-20, but people would order parts kits, lock, stocks, and barrels from overseas, and they would assemble them because just like gunsmith doesn't necessarily know how to make all parts of the guns. In Europe with the guilds, you would have someone that assembled the gun, you had someone that was a woodworker, you had someone that wasn't an engraver, and so it was a process. In America, people needed, a lot of times people needed to be able to do everything, and so they would order those parts and they would make those things, and those were guns that were going into battle. Now there were still guns coming in from France, the Charleville musket. They were the government, the new government was assembling parts of muskets and things that they had, but really everything was a privately made gun until you started talking about gun companies becoming a thing. And so it is really a long tradition. And one of the reasons that's interesting as well is there's this dialogue about, well, if it was in Europe and not necessarily in the United States or not super prevalent in the United States, then can it be regulated? Because wouldn't the founders not know about the one in Europe? And the privately made firearms is a perfect example of, yes, they would, because they were ordering parts from overseas, and you would see some of these things come around. But it's really interesting. I could talk about that for probably the next 4 hours.
Fascinating. It's fascinating how the dynamics have just changed since September 2022 with the Bruin decision. Yeah. Which we've been talking about this.
I think it's June. Was it June?
Well, June. I'm thinking New York State CCA went into effect in September. Yeah. So June, July is when they passed the bill, and September is when. Okay. So New York State's rebuttal to the Bruin decision.
The New York State reaction.
Yes, New York State reaction, but 7 years. It took 7 years for that to get to the Supreme Court. So people don't understand that aspect of it. How it's been a fight before the Supreme Court is what it is.
Well, and that's kind of, I guess, what's interesting, but also kind of sad and disconcerting is what is really a victory, right? Yeah. Prior to the Supreme, once it gets to the Supreme Court, then you've got more finality. But you see these things. Oregon's a great example of Measure 114. I was on the federal case, and the judge upheld 114. Then I was on a case in a rural county in Harney County, and that rural county judge overturned 114 and ruled it unconstitutional, and now I think it's all back. They changed the name and all kinds of stuff. And so, a victory for one day is a loss for them the next day, no matter what side you're on. And then just the amount of money that goes into, taxpayer money that goes into going back and forth. And, you kind of think in general, if the intention, and I'm going to go with good intention, but if the intention was to help save lives, we're not actually doing anything because the laws are just getting bat around back and forth, and nobody's really able to even say if anything would work anyways because it's just constantly locked into the court system.
Yeah, for sure.
But my research center is in the College of Law, so I want to say it's not all bad. They do some good work. Actually, the director of the research center, my colleague, wrote an amicus brief for the NRA case, the Willow case. Recently, he did Carrill, the bump stock case, and then he did the Smith & Wesson and Mexico case recently, amicus briefs for all of that.
Good. That's awesome. Yeah, I say it's awesome that, but it's sad that it even happened, right? That they brought it forward with Mexico and Smith & Wesson and so.
Well, it's very informative as always. I wanted to ask about the privately made firearms because we're going to be at the gunmakers match in April.
June?
Yeah, April. I helped to sponsor the gunmakers match, and we hold it at Pickering Monroeville Sportsman's Club in Pennsylvania. And people bring all kinds of crazy things that they design and develop, and I hope to win again in the staff match with my 3D printed Glock 19.
The interesting thing with that, and these what's new today has really been around for a really long time. So I mentioned the privately made firearms have been around, lock, stock, and barrels, parts kits, all of that was a thing. But I think it's fascinating that you do see all kinds of things that we consider modern that appearing, back in the first self-rotating revolvers in the 1600s. Your first magazines, magazine-fed firearms are in the 1600s, early 1700s. And so everything seems like it's really new. And so many of those things have been around for centuries in a bunch of different capacities in really ingenious ways. But I would even say that I think a lot of gun people don't realize that connection.
Well, that even the same with tactics and training. Even.
Recycle.
I mean, hell, in the grand scheme of humanity, I've been an instructor a very short amount of time. But even in my time, I've seen where we used to teach this and now we're kind of teaching that again because there's a new reason why.
Yeah.
But it's repackaged old stuff a lot of times.
Yeah, basically. More efficient, more reliable, better manufacturing, but still based on the same thing. Yeah.
Innovation,
for sure.
Well, and that too. I mean, it's funny how we support innovation in other industries, but when it comes to innovation and the advancements of firearms or weapons technology, that's something that we shy away from. I think I did say something like that in front of the Senate. We celebrate it in other industries, but
AI, computers,
medicine.
Yeah.
Well, I guess that was a little bit more controversial since COVID, but in general, but when it comes to arms development, they don't want the advancement, which is kind of weird. A lot of countries don't. They want the advancement, so we should want it too.
Yeah, absolutely. So you had mentioned guns being stolen and whatnot, and then also the Glock 18, the full auto Glock.
Yeah.
So I had a 17 turned into a 18, basically. Had it made full auto at another FFL. Had it shipped back to me through USPS, and it got stolen in the mail.
Really?
They just found it. So it was stolen in May. I was actually down in PA with Klint, and then they just found it. I just got a call a couple weeks ago. They found it. Memphis PD found it.
Memphis PD. Oh my God.
Yeah. So I'm supposed to be getting it. Only took.
Fingers crossed.
I honestly, I cannot believe they found it.
I didn't either. I was thinking they'd scratch out the serial number, right, to face it, but no. So they found it. They found the serial number, and they're like, "Yep, there it is."
I mean, when it comes to the serial numbers, it's funny when people try to sell them, resell them after they steal them, because it's like, well, we can track that, we can find that. Yeah.
Exactly. National database.
There's a group that came to Cody years ago, one of our symposiums. I can't remember what division of the government it was, but they were actually looking into a bunch of really high-profile museum firearms thefts.
Wow.
I couldn't help.
You couldn't.
I could not help. I did not know where they were.
Aw.
I know. It was very exciting. I thought I was going to be like a spy, but it did not happen.
She helped us recover these.
Yeah, didn't help.
Well,
sadly.
Always awesome having you on.
Thank you so much.
And we always appreciate it.
Thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
So, how can people learn more about what you're doing?
Sure, yeah. So if you are interested in what we're doing at the University of Wyoming with the Research Center, we're firearmsresearchcenter.org, so it's pretty easy to remember. And there's all kinds of stuff on there, working papers. If you want to read all the amicus briefs that have been filed, we're working on a historical law database. Cool. So in 2025, you'll be able to search for every firearms law that's ever happened in the U.S. With the PDF copy or the PDF copies of the actual law, because other places have those databases, but they put like ellipses, and kind of summarize rather than putting the real thing. So it's got a ton of information on it. And if you're interested in just seeing what I'm doing, theguncode.com is technically my website, although I don't really do much with it, but you can contact me via there. And I'm History and Heels on Instagram, but I feel like I've gotten lazy on that, so.
I think we've all gotten a little lazy on it.
Yeah, social media is just a lot of work and no one's paying me.
And that's the truth.
Yeah.
So check her out and help her out.
Yeah, check out our sponsors too, like Otis, and go to our website or to the YouTube channel, hit the thummy, clicky bell thing, and be a subscriber and tell your friends.
Stay safe.
Hello, my name is Klint Macro, co-founder and administrator of National Train a Teacher Day. National Train a Teacher Day is a grassroots movement of volunteer firearms, safety, first aid, and defense instructors that offer free training to teachers, school staff, administrators, and those that work with youth in a leadership capacity. We do this every year on National Train a Teacher Day. This year marks the 8th annual National Train a Teacher Day, and we'll be observing it on Saturday, June 21st, 2025. That's Saturday, June 21st, 2025. Over the years, hundreds of volunteer instructors have trained thousands of teachers, school staff, administrator, and those that work with youth in a leadership capacity. If you fit that bill, or if you know someone that does, we encourage you to visit or have them visit the website, which is nationaltrainateacherday.com, and connect with a local instructor and take advantage of this fantastic free training opportunity. We'd like to thank our volunteers, our partners, and our sponsors for helping make National Train a Teacher Day a success each year. But most of all, we want to thank you, the teachers, school staff, administrators, and youth leaders who take the time to empower themselves with information to better protect those that they educate. and that is our children. Visit the website, spread the word, and we will see you on National Train a Teacher Day, Saturday, June 21st, 2025. Thanks.
There's lots of sponsors that make this show possible, like Mantis, Next Level Training, like Henry, like
XS Sites.
Check them out and give them your business.
Meet the Pressers is brought to you by Mantis. Mantis X helps shooters suck less. Next Level Training. Makers of CERT training products. Henry Repeating Arms. Made in America or not made at all. XS Sights. Fast sights in any light. Meet the Pressers is also brought to you by these fine companies, shows, organizations, and our Patreon members. Thank you.
Thanks for watching the show.
Make sure you like, subscribe, share, and click that little bell thingy so you know when the next episode's coming out. Support us on Patreon. Come to one of our classes. Host us to come to you and do one of our classes at your location.
And until next time,
Adieu.
Thank you for watching Meet the Pressers.